What do you want readers to take away from your essay?
I think the biggest thing I want people to take away from it is that the Bible is more inclusive than we often think. And I think people usually use it for hate. It can also be used to be inclusive and um, just lovely. It
Yeah.
doesn't always have to be so hateful, but I think people get caught up in interpretations that aren't always necessarily right.
How do you feel about how your essay ended up?
I was very happy with my final product. I think looking back on it now, there's definitely places that could be improved. I think I would have liked to do more research because I feel like a lot of my paper ended up being kind of theoretical in the beginning because I had to set up um, everything leading up to the story of Naomi and Ruth. So I think if I would have been able to dive in a little deeper to the Bible itself, I think that would have been really useful and interesting to do. But I had to build it up a lot before I could get into that. So I didn't have necessarily enough time to dive into it more.
If you could, would you change any part of your essay?
I don't think I would change any part of it. I think I would more just like add on, maybe doing like little line edits and stuff that I found like more recently. But other than that, I don't think I would change anything about it as it is right now.
How and when did you realize the relationship between Ruth and Naomi was closer than it first appeared?
I think I've always kind of viewed it in that way, but I think it's maybe because of my personal views. But I think I don't know. I think it's kind of obvious in the text. I think people are often almost blinded by what they know about the Bible and how people have interpreted it before. So it can be harder to see. But most of the other like sources that I read agreed that their relationship was abnormal. It wasn't something that was seen, especially back in like ancient times. Um, so I don't know. It was obvious to me, but maybe not. Maybe
Yeah.
not to other people.
hmm Have you in your real life brought this up to people? And if you have, what would be their main argument if they disagreed with you, or vice versa?
I think the main arguments are usually surrounding how homosexuality was outlawed and they couldn't be queer because it's the Bible. Queer people didn't exist. So that's the main argument that I've heard. And I think in response to that, I would say that their queer relationships today are different than they were back then. And they weren't always like as overt, or they would have been overt in different ways than we see as overt today. So like, well, Ruth and Naomi, they never like kissed or
Yeah.
anything, but I think it's pretty obvious that their relationship went beyond that of like mother-in-law and
hmm
sister or like daughter-in-law. It
Yeah.
was very much something that subverted um, what we think of as a normal patriarchal relationship between like women.
No, I'm not too well versed in the Bible, but of course I know some things here and there. But reading your essay, I did not know anything about Ruth or Naomi. So why do you think this topic of Ruth and Naomi is not discussed more?
I think a lot of the time when people read the Bible from like a Christian perspective, they don't really focus too much on the Old Testament. They more focus, or and if they do, it's more on like Genesis.
hmm
Um, and they especially focus on the New Testament and the Gospels. So I think that might be just why Ruth isn't discussed as much. I also think a lot of the times people's exposure to the Bible is through church and through sermons. And so there can be, I think there is merit in teaching Ruth or like preaching about it, but I just don't think that topic is touched on much. And I don't think a lot of churches like touch on women's role in the Bible and like and their relationships within the Bible. So I think that might be why. And I think a lot of churches are also kind of afraid to, or they're against looking at Ruth and Naomi through like a queer lens.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, because you did mention about reading with the Bible. Because you did like briefly go talked about that in your text. Could you go more in depth with that?
yeah, so initially when I was or my primary text was uh, a collection of essays about the Bible through queer lenses, and this was kind of one of the first books that was touching or reading the Bible in a queer way.
Mm.
And so that was kind of where I started with this paper. And I noticed while I was reading it, a lot of the authors in that book felt that they needed to read against the Bible because so many people were using the Bible to say that queerness was wrong, homosexuality sexuality was wrong, and so they felt that they had to like push back against the Bible itself. And as I was reading, I kind of found that I disagreed with that. I don't think we need to necessarily push against the Bible, but we need to push around or push against the culture surrounding it and the way that we've talked about the Bible.
Mm.
And so that's where I kind of decided that I was reading with the Bible because I think the queerness is already there in the Bible. We can see homosexuality in the Bible. It's just a lot different than we think of homosexuality and queerness today. So that's why I kind of took the approach of reading with it because I don't think we need to read against it at
Mm.
all because it's there. We
Yeah.
just need to look a little deeper.
Do you believe there's any other uh, relationship like Ruth and Naomi in the Bible? Maybe not to the extent, but at least like hints.
Yeah, I definitely do. I know there's a few people who have gone in on the relationship between Jesus and one of I think it was Jesus and Peter. People have kind of delved into that relationship and how, maybe it was queer. But there's also a lot of stories within the Bible that people have looked at as being queer. And it's it's really interesting to look into because the Bible isn't really one of those things that we think of as queer. We think of
Yeah.
it as largely or heterosexual. So there's definitely other ones that have existed and do exist. I just can't think of them off the top of my
Yeah.
head
No,
right
all good.
now.
Yeah. So going off with the topic of like reading with, do you think that like not just like the Bible, but with like other books, the idea of like going in negative is always a negative.
Yeah, so like if you go into something with a negative perspective, can you come out of it with a positive one?
Yeah.
Um, it gives you the opportunity to kind of look at the text critically
Mm-hmm.
and kind of question what you're reading. I I personally had a negative view of the Bible for a very long time because I've seen the way that it's been used against, I mean, queer people, people of color, and it's just been used in a lot of negative ways. And so when I started taking religious studies classes, it gave me the opportunity to actually look at the text and ignore what was going on around ignore the conversations around it. So I definitely don't think it's a bad thing to go into it with a negative perspective because I definitely did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you go into it with a negative perspective, you you can come out with a negative perspective still,
Yeah.
but I also think it gives you a way to clear out all the noise surrounding it and really examine it closely and read. I think it also helps to read like various opinions on what has been written because I won't sit here and say that everything in the Bible is perfect, but I do think there are some very positive aspects and people tend to focus on the negative.
What advice would you give someone who is having a difficult time reading with the Bible, like I mentioned in your paper, and what steps would they take to eventually get to that spot?
I think kind of what I just previously mentioned is really focusing on what's written in the
Mm.
text and focusing on the language that's there. I know what helped me was I have, or for Dr. Cootie's class, we got the HarperCollins Study Bible. And so you have the regular text, like the regular Bible or biblical text, and then there's footnotes kind of explaining everything that's going on in the verses. And sometimes it makes it a little more clear, and you get more like academic um, perspective on what's going on in the Bible, because taking the words at face value isn't very helpful because the Bible has been translated over and over and over again. So sometimes the language doesn't match up like perfectly, and so some clarification is needed. That's happened with the word homosexual too. That's in the Bible, but the translation isn't like one to one. So I think that really helped me. And I guess if someone is having trouble reading with the Bible too, I don't think they should have to force it. I think it's good to look look at it though and kind of see where you can challenge your perspectives and where your perspective differences or differs from others. I think helping or that helped me too was reading what other people had read. If there were certain verses that were bothering me, I kind of dug a little deeper.